If you use Signal on your iPhone because you think it's the most private messaging app there is, I need you to stop what you're doing for the next few minutes. Because in April 2026, the FBI proved that assumption wrong in a way that should genuinely worry you. And the fix involves a setting almost nobody knows exists, buried 3 menus deep, turned on by default, quietly leaking your private conversations onto your own lock screen and into your phone's internal storage even after you think you've deleted the evidence. Here's exactly what happened, why it matters even if you don't use Signal, and the full list of hidden iPhone settings security experts say you should check right now, today, before you finish watching this video. This isn't some abstract, far-off concern reserved for whistleblowers and government officials either, and that's really the whole point of walking through this list in this much detail. The overwhelming majority of people watching this video will never be the specific target of a federal investigation, and that's genuinely good news, but the exact same technical gaps that let investigators pull data off a suspect's phone are, by definition, sitting on every single iPhone running the same software, including yours, including mine. A thief who steals your phone off a restaurant table doesn't care whether you're a suspect in anything. They just want access, and the settings that stop a federal forensic tool from doing its job are frequently the exact same settings that stop a common opportunistic thief from doing theirs. That's why this story, despite starting with a fairly narrow criminal case, is worth every ordinary person's attention. Not because you have anything to hide, but because nothing to hide was never really the right way to think about privacy in the first place. The right way to think about it is simply that your conversations, your location history, and or accounts belong to you, and you get to decide how much of that stays visible to people who were never supposed to see it. Let's start with the case that kicked all of this off. According to reporting from 404 Media in April 2026, federal investigators managed to retrieve Signal messages from a suspect's iPhone, and here's the part that should stop you cold. The Signal app itself had already been deleted from the phone by the time investigators got their hands on it. Signal is built on end-to-end encryption, the same technology that makes it, on paper, one of the most secure messaging apps available to ordinary people. The same technology journalists, lawyers, activists, and privacy-conscious users around the world rely on, specifically because it's supposed to make interception mathematically impractical. The assumption most users make, reasonably, is that once a message is read and the app is gone, there's nothing left to find. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Investigators didn't crack Signal's encryption, and this is an important distinction because it means Signal's core security promise wasn't actually broken. They didn't need to break it. Instead, they went after something far simpler, far more mundane, and far more overlooked. The iPhone's own push notification database, a quiet background system that every single app on your phone uses to show you those little banners and previews when a new message comes in. Here's how that system actually works. And understanding the mechanism is what makes this story so unsettling. When someone sends you a Signal message, Apple's servers deliver a notification to your device telling it that new content has arrived. Your iPhone then has to briefly decrypt and render that message content locally so it can display the preview text on your lock screen, in Notification Center, and in the banner that pops up while you're using another app. That rendered content doesn't just vanish instantly. Remnants of it get logged into a local database that the operating system maintains specifically to manage your notification history. Under normal circumstances, this is completely invisible and harmless. It's meant to be transient, overwritten, cycled through, and eventually cleared. But as this case demonstrated, forensic extraction tools, the specialized hardware and software law enforcement, and more troublingly, certain private actors use to pull data off a locked or unlocked phone, could dig into that notification database and recover content that the app itself and the user believed was long gone. Investigators weren't able to recover messages the suspect had personally sent. Since those never generate an incoming notification on the sender's own device, only the messages other people had sent to them, but that's still a meaningful, potentially incriminating, or simply deeply private chunk of a conversation sitting somewhere it was never supposed to survive. Recoverable long after the app itself had been deleted, in what the user presumably believed was a clean, complete removal. Once this story broke, security researchers were quick to point out something important. This isn't a flaw unique to Signal, and it isn't really a flaw in the traditional sense at all. It's a structural feature of how push notifications work across essentially every messaging app on iOS, WhatsApp, Telegram, standard messages, Instagram direct messages, all of it. Whenever an app is allowed to show notification previews, the content of that notification, meaning the actual text of the message, has to be generated and briefly stored somewhere on your device so the operating system can display it to you. And that storage step is the exact point where forensic tools can potentially intervene. This means the problem isn't Signal being poorly built. It's a trade-off baked into the convenience of notifications, generally, a trade-off most users have never been told they're making. It's also worth flagging why this particular story spread as fast as it did, because Signal has built its entire brand and its entire user base around a single promise, that it's the messaging app trusted by people who genuinely need airtight privacy. Journalists protecting sources, lawyers discussing privileged cases, activists organizing under hostile governments, and millions of ordinary people who simply value not having their private conversations exposed. When a story breaks showing that even Signal's users weren't fully protected, not because of a flaw in Signal's own code, but because of how the underlying operating system handles something as mundane as a notification, it understandably shakes confidence in the entire category of secure messaging apps. Generally, and that's exactly why understanding the actual mechanism matters so much more than just reacting to the scary headline. This wasn't Signal failing at its one job. It was a reminder that end-to-end encryption only protects a message while it's in transit and while it's being stored inside the app that's actually designed to protect it. The moment that content gets handed off to the operating system to display as a notification, it's temporarily operating under a different, less rigorous set of protections. And that handoff point is exactly where this entire story lives. So here's the actual fix, and this is the specific hidden setting this video is named after. Open Signal, go into Settings, then Notifications, then Notification Content, and you'll find a toggle most people have never touched once in their life. By default, it's usually set to show the sender's name and a full preview of the message content, right? They're on your lock screen, convenient, but leaving a trail. Change that setting to either No Content, which hides the message text but still shows you who it's from, or for maximum privacy, No Name or Content, which strips the notification down to a completely generic alert with no identifying information at all. Making this change means your notifications become slightly less convenient. You won't get that quick glance at what someone said without unlocking your phone first, but it also means there's dramatically less sensitive data sitting in that notification database in the first place, less for anyone to recover later, whether that's a hacker, a thief who's stolen your phone, a jealous partner who picks it up off the counter, or in a worst-case scenario, a law enforcement investigation you never expected to be anywhere near. And because this is a structural issue with how iOS notifications work, not a Signal-specific bug, it's absolutely worth doing the same audit across every messaging app you use. Go to Settings, then Notifications, then tap through each app one at a time. WhatsApp, Telegram, Standard Messages, Instagram, whatever you've got installed, and look for a Show Previews option inside each app's individual notification settings. Apple actually gives you 3 choices at the system level for this across the board: always when unlocked and never. When unlocked is a solid middle ground for most people. It means previews only show up if your phone is already unlocked when the notification arrives, so a stranger glancing at your locked phone sitting on a table, a coworker walking past your desk, or someone who's picked your pocket can't read your messages just by looking, but you still get full convenience once you're actively using your device. If you handle genuinely sensitive conversations, work communications involving confidential material, financial information, medical details, or anything you'd truly rather nobody else ever laid eyes on, never is worth seriously considering, even if it costs you a bit of everyday convenience. Now, this notification setting is the headline story, the one that earned this video its title, but it's really just one entry point into a much bigger conversation about hidden iPhone security settings that quietly exist, do real, meaningful work protecting you every single day, and that most people never think to check even once. So let's go through the rest of them properly, one at a time. Because if you're already worried enough to be watching a video with FBI warning in the title, you deserve the full, complete picture, not just one isolated setting. First, lockdown mode. This is one of Apple's most powerful, most underused security features on the entire operating system. And it was originally built for an extreme use case: journalists, human rights activists, and public figures who might be targeted by sophisticated, extremely expensive spyware, the kind of tools nation-states and well-funded private surveillance firms use to remotely compromise a phone without the owner ever clicking a single malicious link. When you turn on lockdown mode, your iPhone dramatically shrinks its attack surface across the board. Message attachments and most link previews get blocked by default, since those are common vectors for zero-click exploits. Certain complex, exploit-prone web technologies that sophisticated hackers rely on get disabled in Safari. Incoming FaceTime, calls from numbers you haven't called before, get blocked automatically. Wired connections to accessories and computers get restricted unless your phone is unlocked at the exact moment of the connection attempt. Shared albums and invitations get restricted too. It sounds extreme, and for most ordinary users, going about a normal day, it genuinely is more restriction than you strictly need. But if you've ever had a specific reason to believe You might be a targeted individual, a journalist covering sensitive material, someone involved in high-stakes legal proceedings, or you simply want the maximum available protection and don't mind a slightly less convenient phone in exchange. It's sitting right there in Settings, under Privacy and Security, near the very bottom of the menu, and it takes about 10 seconds to switch on. Second, Stolen Device Protection, a feature Apple rolled out specifically to deal with a very real, very common, and frankly terrifying crime that exploded in prevalence over the past few years. Someone watching you type your passcode in public, at a bar, a concert, on the subway, then physically stealing your phone moments later and using that passcode to lock you out of your own accounts, change your Apple ID password, remove your cards from Apple Pay, and drain your finances, sometimes within minutes, before you have any chance to respond. Stolen Device Protection adds a critical extra layer specifically designed to close this exact loophole. When your phone is away from familiar locations, like your home or your regular workplace, sensitive actions, changing your Apple ID password, viewing saved passwords stored in your keychain, turning off Find My, adding a new Face ID or fingerprint, require Face ID or Touch ID. Confirmation with absolutely no passcode fallback option available, meaning a thief who only has your passcode is stuck. And for the most sensitive actions of all, there's a mandatory 1-hour security delay plus a second biometric confirmation required before the change actually goes through. That 1-hour delay might sound like a minor annoyance until seventh, and this one ties directly back to where we started this whole conversation. Advanced data protection for iCloud. By default, Apple already encrypts a fairly long list of sensitive iCloud data categories, but a smaller, still meaningful set of categories, including standard iCloud device backups, are technically accessible to Apple under a valid, lawful government request, specifically because Apple itself retains a copy of the encryption key needed to unlock them. Advanced data protection extends true end-to-end encryption to nearly everything stored in your iCloud account, including full device backups, your entire photos library, notes, reminders, Safari bookmarks, and more, meaning that even Apple itself, as the company operating the servers, no longer holds a key capable of unlocking your data. The trade-off here, and it's a genuinely real one you need to think through carefully, is that if you ever lose access to your account entirely and don't have a proper recovery method, a recovery key stored somewhere safe, or a designated recovery contact set up in advance, not even Apple's own support team can help you get that data back, ever. It's a meaningful, deliberate decision, not a casual toggle to flip without thinking. But for anyone taking their personal privacy seriously, it's sitting right there under Settings, your name, iCloud, then Advanced Data Protection, waiting for you to turn it on. It's also worth putting this in a slightly wider context because Android phones face a broadly similar set of trade-offs, just distributed across a different set of settings and a more fragmented ecosystem of manufacturers. Android users have their own version of notification content controls, typically found under each app's individual notification settings or under a phone-wide sensitive notification toggle. And Google has been steadily rolling out features conceptually similar to Apple's advanced data protection and stolen device protection over the past couple of years, including theft detection lock and offline device lock features on newer Pixel and Samsung devices. The underlying lesson is the same, regardless of which operating system you're on. Convenience features like notification previews are, by their very nature, a trade-off against privacy, and most manufacturers default to the convenient option because that's what tests better for the average user experience, not because it's the more secure choice. That default only changes when enough people go in and manually flip it themselves. Now, stepping back from this list for a moment, it's worth being genuinely honest about something, because a lot of videos carrying titles like this one tend to oversell the threat, purely to keep you watching until the end. The FBI is not sitting in some office somewhere individually targeting random iPhone users going about their normal lives. The Signal notification database story was tied to one specific ongoing criminal investigation, not a mass surveillance sweep quietly conducted against ordinary people's phones nationwide. The broader, far more common threats you actually face on a day-to. Day basis are things like straightforward phone theft, where someone physically grabs your unlocked or easily guessed device out of your hand or off a table. Phishing and smishing scams, where attackers simply trick you into voluntarily handing over sensitive information yourself, and data broker exposure, where information about you gets quietly bought, sold, and aggregated across dozens of apps and services you've technically agreed to somewhere along the way, but almost certainly never actually read the terms and conditions for. The FBI itself has spent the better part of 2025 and well into 2026 issuing repeated, well-documented public warnings about exactly these kinds of scams, coordinated impersonation of senior government officials, conducted over text message and AI-generated voice messages. Designed to build false trust, fake FBI agents cold calling people and demanding money over the phone to supposedly avoid imminent criminal charges, and smishing campaigns engineered to steal login credentials through convincing fake links disguised as toll payment notices, delivery notifications, or bank alerts. None of those particular threats require some exotic hidden setting to defend against. They mostly require the same boring, unglamorous, decades-old habits that have always worked. Verifying who you're actually talking to through a separate, independently confirmed channel before trusting them with anything, never sending money or sensitive personal information to someone who contacted you first out of the blue, and treating any message that creates sudden urgency or fear as an automatic, immediate red flag worth pausing on rather than acting on impulsively. The FBI has also specifically flagged risks around public Wi-Fi networks and public charging stations, warning that cybercriminals can exploit unsecured public networks to intercept data in transit, and that a technique known as juice jacking allows compromised public USB charging ports to attempt to install all malware or extract data the moment you plug in, which is why carrying your own personal charger and cable or a portable battery pack and sticking to cellular data or a trusted personal hotspot instead of open public Wi-Fi whenever you're handling anything sensitive remains genuinely sound, low-effort advice worth actually following rather than dismissing as overly cautious. But none of that context means the specific settings covered in this video don't matter, because they absolutely do, and here's why that framing actually holds together logically rather than contradicting itself. Security in the real world isn't about picking one single dramatic fix and calling it done. It's about closing as many small, individually modest doors as reasonably possible, so that when something does eventually go wrong, whether that's a stolen phone left unattended for 30 seconds too long, a targeted attack from someone who actually has a reason to come after you specifically, or some entirely unforeseen scenario you never saw coming, you've already limited how much damage any single point of failure can actually do to your broader digital life. The notification content setting that started this whole story is a perfect, concrete example of exactly that principle in action. It doesn't stop every conceivable threat in the world on its own, but it closes one specific, previously invisible gap that a real, documented federal investigation proved was practically exploitable, and it took less than 30 seconds to fix once you actually knew where to look for it. It's also worth taking a moment to mention basic account hygiene, because it matters just as much as any of the phone-level settings above, and it's often neglected simply because it's less exciting to talk about. Turning on two-factor authentication everywhere it's offered, not just for your Apple ID, but for your email, your banking apps, and your social media accounts, closes off the single most common way accounts actually get compromised in the real world. Using a password manager instead of reusing the same handful of passwords across dozens of sites means that if one service gets breached, and services get breached constantly, your other accounts don't automatically fall like dominoes right along with it. Periodically checking settings, then your name, then sign in and security to review exactly which devices are currently signed into your Apple ID, and immediately removing anything you don't recognize or no longer own is a habit worth building into your routine every few months, since old forgotten devices left signed in are a quiet, often overlooked liability sitting in plain sight. And regularly reviewing individual app permissions under settings, privacy and security, checking exactly which apps have access to your microphone, camera, precise location, and contacts, and revoking anything that clearly doesn't need that level of access for the app to function properly, closes off a huge amount of unnecessary data collection that most people have simply never bothered to audit even once since the day they first installed the app. One more habit worth building in, tied closely to app permissions but distinct enough to call out on its own, is app tracking transparency. The prompt you've almost certainly seen dozens of times, asking whether an app can track your activity across other companies' apps and websites. Every time you tap Allow, you're permitting that app to link your behavior across a much wider web of services than most people realize, building an advertising profile that follows you well beyond the app itself. You can review and revoke every single one of these permissions in bulk at any time under Settings, Privacy and Security, Tracking, where you'll typically find a full list of every app currently allowed to track you, along with a master toggle to block the prompt from ever appearing again for new apps going forward. Very few people ever open this menu after initially setting up their phone and going through it once every few months, revoking access for apps you no longer use or never meant to grant permission to in the first place, is a 5-minute habit that meaningfully shrinks how much of your behavior gets aggregated by data brokers you've never even heard of. So here's what I'd actually recommend doing, concretely, right now, before you close out of this video and move on with your day. Open Settings on your iPhone. Go through your messaging apps one at a time and check the notification preview settings for each one, switching to When Unlocked or Never for anything genuinely sensitive to you. Check whether stolen device protection is currently enabled under Face ID and passcode. Take a quick glance at your significant location's history and clear it out entirely if you don't personally find it useful. Confirm AirDrop is set to contacts only rather than being left open to everyone. Review the list of devices currently signed into your Apple ID and remove anything unfamiliar. And if you've ever had a specific concrete reason to feel like you might be a targeted individual, or you simply want the strongest protection currently available to you, seriously consider both lockdown mode and advanced data protection, fully understanding the real, honest convenience trade-offs that come attached to both of them before you commit. None of this requires you to become paranoid, and none of it requires you to genuinely assume the FBI is coming for you personally, because for the overwhelming majority of people watching this, they aren't and they never will be. It just requires about 5 minutes of your time, a settings menu you've probably never fully explored even once since the day you bought this phone, and a willingness to trade a small amount of everyday convenience for a meaningfully more private, meaningfully more resilient device. The tools already exist, sitting quietly on every iPhone in the world right now. Apple already built every single one of them. Almost nobody actually turns them on. That exact gap between what's technically available and what people actually bother to enable is precisely where stories like the Signal notification case keep happening again and again, and it's precisely the gap you now, having watched this, have the power to close on your own device today in the next 5 minutes before you forget. Before you go, it's worth remembering that security is never really a one-time task you finish and forget about. It's more like basic hygiene, something you revisit periodically as your phone, your apps, and the threats out there all keep quietly evolving in the background, whether you're paying attention or not. Set a reminder on your calendar right now, once every 3 or 4 months, to spend 5 minutes back in these same settings menus, checking for anything new Apple has rolled out, reviewing which devices are signed into your accounts, and making sure nothing has quietly reverted to a less private default after a software update. That small, recurring habit will do more for your actual day-to-day privacy than any single dramatic fix ever could. If this video actually helped you lock down your phone, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming, real, carefully researched, accurate breakdowns of the security stories that are actually worth paying attention to, without the exaggeration and without the fear or mongering that so much of this content online relies on to get clicks. Drop a comment down below and let me know which one of these settings you genuinely didn't know existed until today. I read every single one of them. And if you know someone, a parent, a partner, a friend, who's still walking around with every one of these settings left on default, send them this video, because 5 minutes of their time now could save them a genuinely bad day later. I'll see you in the next video.